The throne hall of the Valorian Imperial Palace was one of the most beautiful places in the known galaxy. The ceiling was so high that clouds formed near the top. The walls were made of a pale blue crystal that glowed softly in the morning light. The floor was so clean and polished that you could see your reflection in it, clear as a mirror. Everything in that hall had been built to make anyone who walked inside feel small. That was the point. Princess Queen Vela stood at the far end of the hall on a raised platform. She was tall, even for a Valorian. Her skin had a faint silver sheen, and her eyes were a deep violet that seemed to glow when the light hit them the right way. She wore a long white robe with gold along the edges, and a thin crown that sat perfectly still on her head even when she moved. She had ruled the Valorian Empire for 11 years. She was 32 years old, and she was already considered one of the greatest rulers her people had seen in centuries. Today was a routine inspection. Nothing unusual. A new Royal Guard unit had arrived from the outer sectors, and it was her custom to walk the line herself. She did not like to leave things like this to her assistants. She wanted to see her guards with her own eyes. Her head of security, a tall Valorian named Commander Orath, walked 2 steps behind her. He had been her personal guard for 6 years. He knew her moods the way a sailor knows the sea, and right now he could tell she was calm, slightly bored even. This was just a formality. The new unit stood in a straight line along the left wall of the throne hall. There were 12 of them. Where the first 11 were exactly what Viola expected. Valorian soldiers, each standing over 2 meters tall, wearing the standard silver and blue powered armor that made them look like statues carved from metal. Their weapons were the standard issue energy rifles, long, sleek, and humming faintly with stored power. Everything about them was precise, clean, and familiar. She moved down the line slowly. Each soldier stood completely still, eyes forward, shoulders back. She gave each one a brief look, nodded, and moved on. It was a rhythm, predictable, comfortable. Then she reached the last one. She stopped. The soldier standing at the end of the line was not a Valorian. He was human. Vela had known there would be one in this unit. It was part of the new agreement with the Human Confederacy, a gesture of goodwill, and a symbol of the growing relationship between their peoples. She had approved the arrangement herself 3 months ago without giving it much thought. But now, standing in front of him, she gave it a great deal of thought. The human was a young man. His name tag read Una. He was lean and not especially tall. The top of his head barely reached the shoulder of the soldier standing next to him. His skin was a warm brown, his hair was short and dark, and his face was calm in a way that seemed less like training and more like genuine ease. He was wearing human-made armor, which was dark gray and looked far simpler than the Valorian suits around him. It had no glow, no hum, no visible power source. Vela looked him over the way she looked over everything, carefully, completely, missing nothing. And then she saw the weapon on his back. It was a rifle of some kind. That much was clear. It had a long barrel and a simple stock, and it was strapped diagonally across his back with a plain black strap. It looked almost old-fashioned compared to everything around it. There were no lights on it, no power cells visible, no hum, no glow, no heat. Vela turned slightly to Commander Orath. She did not need to say anything. She just looked at him. Orath was already looking at the weapon. His brow was furrowed. He raised his wrist and ran a quiet scan. Then he ran it again. He looked at his display screen. He looked at the weapon. He looked at his screen again. He leaned close to Vela and spoke in a low voice. "Your Grace, I am getting no reading on that weapon." Vela looked at him. "No reading at all?" "None," Orath said. "No energy signature, no heat output. One weapon does not exist." Vela looked back. Weapon does not exist. Vela looked back at the human. He was still standing perfectly still, eyes forward, just like the others. He had not moved. He had not reacted. He was simply standing there, holding a weapon that the most advanced sensor arrays in the galaxy could not see, looking completely unbothered by the fact that the Princess Queen of the Valorian Empire had been staring at him for almost 2 full minutes. The rest of the court had gone very quiet. The other 11 soldiers in the line were still at attention, but their eyes had drifted slightly. Even they had noticed something was happening. 3 court officials standing near the throne had stopped their quiet conversation and were now watching. 2 of Viola's personal assistants stood frozen in place, their data tablets held loosely in their hands, forgotten. No one spoke. Vela took one slow step closer to Yuna. She was now standing directly in front of him, close enough that she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes from a long journey. She looked at the weapon over his shoulder. Up close, she could see small details she had missed from farther away. The barrel had tiny marks on it, not decorations, but measurements, scratched in by hand. The stock had a small piece of dark tape wrapped around one part of it, the kind of fix you make in the field when something needs to hold. The weapon was clearly used, clearly worked, clearly real, and yet every sensor in the palace said it was nothing. She looked at his face. He was looking straight ahead, not at her. Boy, that was protocol. Guards did not meet the eyes of the sovereign during inspection, but she had the feeling, strange and sharp, that he was perfectly aware of exactly where she was standing and exactly what she was looking at. She spoke. Her translator piece converted her words to the standard galactic tongue, which the human would understand. "Where did you get that weapon, soldier?" For the first time, Yuna moved, just his eyes dropping briefly to meet hers, before returning to the forward position. When he spoke, his voice was even and quiet. "I carried it from Earth, Your Grace." That was all he said. Vela stood there for a moment longer. Then she straightened up, clasped her hands behind her back, and continued down the end of the line. Even though the line was done, and there was no one left to inspect. It was quiet for exactly as long as it took, them to reach the far wall. Then he said very carefully, "Your Grace, what would you like to do?" Vela looked straight ahead at the pale blue crystal wall. A slow, curious smile crossed her face, the kind she usually worked very hard to hide in public. "Set up a private meeting," she said, "with the human." Oreth blinked. "When?" "This evening," she said, "and find me someone who speaks his language well. I have questions." She had more questions than she had had in years, and that, she thought, was already the most interesting thing that had happened to her all month. The private meeting room was small by palace standards. It had no grand ceiling, no crystal walls, no polished floor that stretched for 100 meters. It was just a round table, 6 chairs, soft lighting, and a window that looked out over the city below. The city glowed in the early evening, thousands of lights blinking on as the sun went down behind the mountains. Vela liked this room. It was the one place in the palace where she felt like a person and not a symbol. She was already seated when Hana arrived. Hana was the human diplomatic liaison attached to the Royal Guard unit. She was a young woman, not much older than Vela herself, with short dark hair and quick brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore a simple navy uniform with the small circular patch of the Human Confederacy on the left shoulder. She walked into the room without hesitation, or gave a small bow that was respectful without being overly formal, and sat down across the table. Yuna came in after her. He had removed his armor and was wearing a simple dark jacket and plain trousers. Without the armor, he looked even less remarkable. Just a quiet young man with tired eyes and clean hands. He sat down beside Hana and folded his hands on the table and waited. Vila looked at him for a moment, then she looked at Hana. "You will translate." "Of course, Your Grace," Hana said. Vila leaned forward slightly. She was not someone who wasted time on small talk. "The weapon on his back this morning. Our sensors found nothing. No energy signature, no material flag, nothing." "How is that possible?" Hana translated. Yuna listened, then spoke in his own language for a moment. Hana turned back to Vela. "He says the weapon uses no energy cells and no power source. It fires using a contained chemical reaction. A very old principle, actually. The oldest kind of firearm humans ever made, adapted and refined, because it has no electronic components, no field emitter, and no stored charge. It produces nothing that your sensors would recognize as a weapon." Vela sat back. "An old principle." "Very old," Hana said. "Humans have been using variations of it for over 600 years. "And it works?" Hana smiled a little. "Yes, Your Grace. It works very well." Vela was quiet for a moment. She looked at Yuna. He looked back at her with the same calm he had shown in the throne hall. Patient, unhurried, completely comfortable with silence. She found that interesting. Most people who sat across from her were nervous, even experienced diplomats. What even her own council members sometimes. This young soldier from a species that had been traveling among the stars for barely 200 years sat in front of her like he had nowhere else to be and nothing to prove. "Where did the weapon come from?" she asked. Hana translated. Yuna answered. "He says a man named Do-hyun built it," Hana said. Do-hyun is the unit's engineer. When the unit was assigned here and given standard Valorian equipment, they found that the sidearms didn't fit human hands properly. The grip shape was wrong, the trigger weight was too heavy, and the recoil management was designed for a Valorian skeletal structure. Do-hyun decided it would be faster to build something new than to request a formal equipment change through the supply chain. Vela stared at her. "He built a new weapon." "Yes." "From what?" Hana asked. While Yuna answered. Hana almost smiled before she translated. "Salvaged components from a decommissioned cargo transport that was being stripped for parts in the docking bay, and some materials he bought from a local supplier in the city the day after they arrived." "How long did it take?" Hana asked. Yuna held up 4 fingers. 4 days, Hana said. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the city below continued to glow, indifferent to the fact that something very significant was happening in this small round room. Viola looked at the table. She looked at Yuna. She looked at the table again. 4 days, she said, mostly to herself. She had engineers on her staff who had spent 3 years developing improvements to the standard palace security array. Good engineers, well-funded, well-supported. 3 years. This young man's colleague had looked at a problem, walked to a salvage yard, and solved it in 4 days using broken pieces of a cargo ship. He was not bothered by this, she asked. Building a weapon from nothing, in a strange city, on a new planet? Hana translated. Yuna thought for a moment, then answered. He says it wasn't from nothing, Hana said. There were plenty of parts. He just had to find them and put them together correctly. He says Do-hyun likes problems like that. Vela looked at Hana directly. Is this normal? For humans? Hana considered the question seriously. It is not unusual, she said. Humans tend to treat problems as temporary, like something to be moved past as quickly as possible. If the tool you have doesn't work, you change the tool. If you can't change it, you build a new one. If you can't build a new one, you find something else that might work instead. She paused. It's not that we think we're clever. It's more that the idea of giving up, or waiting, or simply accepting that something doesn't work. That thought feels very uncomfortable to most of us. Viola was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked something she had not planned to ask. Why? Hana looked at her. Why is that uncomfortable? Viola said. Your species is new to the stars. You are young. You are small by the standards of this galaxy. You have had less time, fewer resources, fewer allies. Why does your first reaction to a problem look like? Attack it? Hana was quiet for a few seconds. This was clearly not a question she had rehearsed an answer to. She glanced at Yuna. He had understood the question from Vela's tone even before Hana translated it, and he said something short and quiet. Hana looked back at Vela. He says, where he comes from, if you waited for someone else to fix the problem usually got worse. So you learn not to wait. Vela looked at Yuna. For just a moment, something crossed his face. Not pride, not confidence, just a plain and simple truth, the kind that doesn't need decoration. Then it was gone, and he was calm again. Vela asked many more questions that evening. She asked about the human arm, the human eye, the human sleep cycle, the way humans experienced heat and cold. She asked about food, about language, about what music sounded like to a human ear. Hana answered what she could and translated the rest. Yuna answered simply and directly, without performing, without showing off, without trying to impress her. By the time the meeting ended, nearly 2 hours had passed. Vela stood, and Yuna and Hana stood with her. She gave them a small nod, the kind she gave to people she respected, and they left. After they were gone, she stayed in the small round room alone and looked out the window at the city for a long time. Then she went to her private study and pulled up 200 years of human history on her reading screen. She started at the beginning. She read about a species that had started in one small corner of a single planet that had fought and starved and burned and rebuilt itself more times than most species ever needed to, and had still found its way to the stars. She read for 5 hours. When the sun came up over the mountains, she was still reading. See, she did not sleep that night. She did not want to. Lord Austin had held his seat on the Valorian High Council for 31 years. He was old, even by Valorian standards, and he had spent those 31 years learning one thing above all others. Power did not stay with the strong. Power stayed with the careful, with the ones who watched and waited and moved only when they were certain. He had seen rulers rise and fall, alliances form and break, wars start over a sentence spoken in the wrong room. He had survived all of it because he never acted from emotion. He acted from calculation. What he had seen in the throne hall during the morning inspection had not frightened him. He was too experienced to be frightened by one small human with a rifle, but it had made him careful, and careful for Austin meant moving quickly. He called the meeting himself. 3 other council members joined him in his private chamber, the smallest and oldest room in the council wing, with no recording devices and no official record of entry. They sat around a low table with cups of warm Tevel root tea and spoke in calm, measured voices, the way powerful people speak when they want their words to feel like reason rather than fear. The Princess Queen spent 2 hours with the human last night, Osin said. She read human history until sunrise. Her attendants confirmed it. The council member to his left, a sharp-faced woman named Delegate Yora, set down her cup. She is curious. That is nothing unusual. She is curious about everything. She is curious about the weapon that our sensors could not find, Austin said. And now she is curious about the people who made it. When there is a difference between general curiosity and focused attention, Yora, you know that. No one argued with him. The humans have been in the Confederacy for less than 20 years, said the third council member, a heavy-set man named Delegate Pervath. They are a client species. They sit below the line. This is not a conversation we should be having. And yet we are having it, Osin said, because their soldier carried a weapon into this palace that our entire security array could not detect. Because their engineer built that weapon in 4 days from salvage. Because the Princess Queen of the Valorian Empire spent her night reading about a species that has been spacefaring for barely 200 years. He looked around the table. How long did it take us to reach the stars? No one answered. They all knew. It had taken the Valorians over 3,000 years of recorded history to develop interstellar travel. Humans did it in 200, Austin said, and they have been here in this empire for less than 20 years, and already they are building things our sensors cannot read. He let that sit for a moment. I am not saying they are dangerous. I am saying they are uncomfortable, and things that make empires uncomfortable tend to become dangerous eventually. Delegate Yora leaned back in her chair. What are you proposing? A formal motion, Austin said, to the full council. Security review of all human personnel assigned to the palace. Grounds. Unverified weapons technology present in a restricted area. It is a reasonable concern. It will hold up to any examination. And the real reason? Yora asked. Austin looked at her steadily. The real reason is that the other species of this empire are watching. The Dravani have been client species for 400 years. The Solori for 260. None of them have ever built something we could not catalog. None of them have ever had the Princess Queen spend the night reading their history after a 20-minute inspection. He folded his hands on the table. If we allow the humans to be elevated, even informally, even just in perception, the others will ask why they were never given the same attention, the same freedom, the same room to simply build something new without asking permission first. The room was quiet. That, Austin said quietly, is what I am afraid of. On the other side of the palace, in a much simpler room in the guard quarter section, Taiho was having a very different kind of meeting. One, he was the unit commander, and he had gathered his 5 people around a small table with a map of the palace on it and a pot of coffee that Rena had somehow found in the city market the day before. They were drinking it from mismatched cups, which felt very normal and very far from home at the same time. Taiho was a compact, quiet man with a calm face and very steady eyes. He had served in 2 conflicts before this assignment and had led his unit through both of them without losing a single person. He was not a man who spoke often, but when he did, his team listened. "I know some of you have noticed the looks," he said, "from the council wing, from some of the senior staff. Things have been a little cool since the inspection yesterday." Doyen, the engineer, looked up from his coffee. He was younger than the others, when with an open face and quick hands that were always faintly stained with something. Oil, adhesive, metal dust. "Is it the rifle?" "Partly," Taiho said, "but not just that." He looked around at each of them. Yuna, calm as always. Hana, alert and thoughtful. Rena, who was watching him with the focused attention of someone who expected practical information. Do-hyun, who was already turning something over in his mind that had nothing to do with politics. "We are in a place that has been the center of power in this part of the galaxy for 3,000 years. We have been spacefaring for 200. To some of the people here, we are not impressive. We are a curiosity at best and a threat at worst. Not because of anything we have done wrong, just because of what we are." "So what do we do?" Rena asked. "We do the job," Taiho said simply. "We do it well. We stay professional. We stay polite. We do not try to show off, and we do not try to convince anyone of anything." He looked at Do-hyun specifically. "If something needs fixing, fix it quietly. Don't make it a performance." Do-hyun nodded. "The rifle was just a practical solution." "I know," Taiho said, "and it was a good one. But try to keep the next practical solution a little less dramatic, if possible." There was a very small smile on his face when he said it. Yuna looked at his commander. "Do you think they will try to move us out?" Taiho thought about this honestly. "Maybe. There are people here who would prefer us somewhere less visible. But the Princess Queen approved this assignment personally, and from what Hana tells me, she is still interested." He looked at Hana. Hana nodded. "Ara, she asked a lot of questions last night. Good ones. She is not finished asking." "Then we stay useful," Taiho said. "We stay humble. We stay human." He picked up his coffee cup. "That's the only strategy we have. It's always been the only strategy we have." Outside the small window of the guard quarters, the palace city moved through its morning routine, ancient and certain of itself. And inside that small room, 5 humans drank their coffee and prepared, as humans always did, to simply keep going. It happened at 11 in the morning, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. One moment the palace was full of light and sound and movement, staff walking the corridors, council assistants carrying data tablets, kitchen workers preparing the midday meal, guards standing at their posts with the quiet hum of powered armor filling the halls. And the next moment everything stopped. The lights went out, the hum died, the screens went blank, the elevators locked in place, the great automated doors sealed shut, the sensor arrays, the communication relays, the shield emitters, all of it gone in a single breath. The palace went completely dark. For the Velorian Royal Guard, this was a disaster. Their armor ran on a power system that connected to the palace grid. When the grid died, the armor locked. Not all the way. They could still move, still breathe, still see. But their weapons went offline. Their communication links went dead, and the heads-up display inside each helmet showed nothing but a flat, unhelpful error message. They were soldiers standing in heavy, useless metal suits, blind and silent, waiting for a system restart that was not coming. Commander Orath stood in the main corridor near the throne hall and tried to keep the panic out of his voice as he spoke to the frozen soldiers around him. There was no panic, not yet, but there was something close to it, sitting just beneath the surface of every face in the corridor. The palace had never gone dark, not once, not in 300 years of recorded security history. And somewhere in this dark, sealed palace, there were people who had planned this. Taiho heard the power cut from 2 corridors away. He felt it more than heard it, a sudden absence of sound that his body recognized before his brain did. He was on his feet before the echo of it had finished moving through the walls. "Up," he said to his team, "now." They were all awake. They had all felt it. Yuna was already moving to the door. Doyen was on his knees beside his kit bag, pulling it open with quick, practiced hands. Rena was checking her medical pack. Hana was pulling on her boots. None of them had armor that connected to the palace grid. None of their equipment ran on Valorian power systems. Their comms were built on human frequency bands that operated independently. Their lights were small, handheld, chemical battery-powered. Their weapons ran on the same principle as Yuna's rifle. No power cells, no electronic trigger, no connection to anything the palace blackout could touch. Taiho clicked on his small light. Do-hyun, find the nearest backup generator and get it running. Rena, set up here. This room becomes the medical station. Hana, stay close to me. Yuna, he paused. You already know. Yuna nodded. He had his rifle off his back and in his hands. His light was clipped to the barrel. He stepped out into the dark corridor without another word. Do-hyun moved fast through the service passages of the palace, following the building schematic he had memorized 3 days after their arrival. Not because anyone had asked him to, but because he always memorized building schematics. It was a habit. You never knew when a habit would save your life. He found the emergency generator room on sub-level 2. It had a manual lock, an old mechanical one, the kind that predated the electronic systems by about 200 years and had never been removed because no one thought they'd ever need it. Do-hyun had a set of manual lock tools in his kit. Of course he did. He was inside in 90 seconds. The generator was Valorian built, which meant it ran on a crystal compression system he had never worked with directly. He studied it for about 45 seconds with his small light. Then he opened his kit and started working. He had no instruction manual. He had the layout of the machine in front of him, a good understanding of basic power physics, and the very strong motivation of being locked in a dark palace with unknown hostiles somewhere in the building. 22 minutes later, the emergency lights in a 20-meter radius of the generator room flickered on. It was not full power. It was not even close to full power. But it was light, and light was something. He clicked his comm. Do-hyun to Taiho, partial power, sub-level 2 radius. I can expand it, but I need more time. Good work, Taiho's voice came back. Keep going. In the medical room, Karina had set up her station with a precision that would have impressed any field surgeon. She had a folding light rig, a clean surface, a full kit laid out in order. She had also found in the bottom of her personal bag 3 long emergency candles she carried as a matter of habit. She lit them and placed them at intervals around the room. 2 Valorian soldiers had found their way to her door, stumbling in the dark in their locked-up armor. They couldn't remove it without power. She couldn't remove it without the right tools. But she could keep them calm, and she could check for injuries through the face visor, and she could make sure they were breathing properly and not going into shock. The candles cast a warm orange glow over the room. The Valorian soldiers stared at them with wide violet eyes, as if they had never seen fire used as a tool before. One of them asked through the helmet speaker what the small burning sticks were. Candles, Rena said simply, checking his pulse through a gap in his armor cuff. Old human technology. Yuna moved through the dark palace like water moving through a pipe. Quiet, steady, finding every gap and channel. He knew the layout of this building the same way Do-hyun knew it, for the same reason. He had his light, his rifle, and the particular kind of focus that comes not from training alone, but from a very deep and personal understanding of what happens when you stop paying attention. He found the first infiltrator on level 3, near the archive wing. The man was Valorian, dressed in a maintenance uniform, was carrying a small device that was almost certainly part of the jamming system responsible for the blackout. He did not hear Yuna coming. He did not see Yuna coming. He was simply standing there one moment, and the next moment he was on the floor, zip-tied at the wrists and ankles with a set of plastic ties from Yuna's jacket pocket, alive and uninjured and going absolutely nowhere. The second was near the communications tower access point. The third was attempting to reach Vila's private study on the upper floor. Yuna found him in the stairwell outside the study, moving fast and quiet, but not fast enough and not quiet enough. What followed was brief and left no permanent damage to anyone, which Yuna considered the correct outcome. He stepped over the unconscious man and moved to the study door. He knocked twice, then once, and then twice again. A simple code he had arranged with Hana for exactly this kind of situation. more out of professional habit than expectation. The door opened. Viola was inside. She was sitting at her reading desk, completely still, surrounded by 4 frozen Valorian guards in locked armor, who stood around her like very large, very useless ornaments. She had a single candle burning on the desk beside her, one that Hannah had quietly left in her study 2 days ago, with a simple note: "For emergencies, light it if the power goes." She was reading by its light, a small printed document, calm as a stone in a still pond. She looked up at Yuna in the doorway. His light was still on, clipped to the rifle barrel. He was a little out of breath. There was a small cut on his left hand that had not been there that morning. But he was steady. Ashley and his eyes were clear, and he held the rifle the way someone holds a tool they know completely. For a moment she just looked at him. The 4 armored Valorian guards looked at him. The candle flickered once. Then Vela said, slowly and carefully, in the halting human words she had been quietly practicing since that first evening, "I knew it would be you." Yuna looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not much, just a small movement at the corner of his mouth. It was as close to a smile as she had seen from him. "Are you hurt, Your Grace?" he asked. "No," she said. "Then we should move you to a more secure location," he said. "I have 2 more zip ties." She closed her book, stood up, and walked to the door. "Lead the way," she said. Behind them, the 4 armored guards began to follow. Their powered suits finally beginning to reboot as Do-hyun's generator work pushed more power through the building. The palace was slowly coming back to life. But for the next 3 minutes, walking through the dark corridor with a small human soldier and a single candle she carried in her hand, Vela felt safer than she had all day. The palace was repaired within 3 days. The power came back fully, the doors unsealed, the armor rebooted, the sensor arrays came back online one by one. Repair teams moved through every corridor with their tools and their data pads, checking systems and replacing damaged components, and writing reports that would be read by committees and filed in archives and discussed in meetings for months afterward. Life in the palace went back to normal, or something close to it. But Vala did not go back to normal. Or rather, she went back to the motions of normal. The meetings, the public appearances, the long hours at her desk signing documents and reviewing policy. While inside, she was thinking about something she could not quite put into words yet. Something she had seen in the dark, in the corridors, in the quiet efficiency of 5 humans operating in a situation that had paralyzed everyone around them. On the 4th evening after the attack, she made a decision that surprised her entire court staff and deeply unsettled Lord Asen. She invited the human unit to dinner, not as guards, not as staff, as guests. The dining room she chose was not the formal state hall with its long table and its 36 chairs and its view of the main courtyard. That room was built for politics, for performance, for the careful theater of diplomatic meals where every dish had a meaning and every seat placement sent a message. She chose instead the small inner dining room on the 3rd floor, the one with the round table that seated 8 comfortably, the one with the low lights and the tall windows and the good smell of real food coming from a kitchen that was just 1 door away. Her personal attendant, a gentle older woman named Soren, had looked at the seating arrangement and then looked at Vela with an expression that said many things without saying any of them. "They saved my life," Vela said simply. Soren nodded, made a small note on her data pad, and said nothing further. She was very good at her job. The humans arrived together, which Viola appreciated. They were dressed neatly but not formally. Clean clothes, plain colors. In the same easy practicality they brought to everything. They came in quietly, took their seats with small nods and no fuss, and looked around the room with the alert, curious eyes of people who are always paying attention to their surroundings without making it obvious. The food came. It was a mix of Valorian dishes and a few things the kitchen had been asked to prepare using human recipes that Hannah had sent over the day before. There was warm bread, which smelled extraordinary and which every human at the table reached for immediately. There were roasted vegetables and a clear soup, and something sweet at the end that Viola did not have a name for, but which she decided immediately was one of the best things she had ever tasted. They ate, and they talked a little, and the room was warm and unhurried. Then Viola set down her fork and looked at her guests. "I want to ask you something," she said, And it is not a diplomatic question. It is a personal one. Hana translated for those who needed it. The table went quiet, attentive, but not tense. I want each of you to tell me a story, Viola said. Not history, not facts, not a briefing. A story. Something real. Something from your own life or from someone you knew. There was a short silence. Then Taiho, who was sitting directly across from Vela, nodded slowly. I'll go first, he said. He told her about his grandfather. The old man had been a fisherman on the coast, a real coast, on the edge of an actual ocean, which Viola found both simple and beautiful as a concept. His grandfather had gone out one morning with two other men in a small wooden boat, when and while they were out on the water, a storm had come up fast. The other two men made it back to shore. The grandfather did not. His boat was damaged, the storm was too strong to sail through, and he was alone on the open water, with night coming in. He had lashed himself to the mast of his boat with rope, not to save himself from being washed overboard, although that too, but specifically so he could not fall asleep. He knew that if he slept before the storm passed, he would die. So he tied himself standing up, facing into the wind, and he sang. He sang every song he knew. He sang them in order, from the ones he had learned as a small child to the ones he had learned at sea. He sang badly and he sang loudly, and the ocean and the storm did not care at all. When morning came and the storm broke, a passing vessel found him still tied to the mast, still awake, hoarse and soaking and alive. He had lived to be 94 years old. He had told that story at every family gathering for the rest of his life. He had never once, Taiho said, seemed to think there was anything unusual about it. Viola listened without moving. When Taiho finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He was not afraid?" "He was terrified," Taiho said. "That's why he sang." Rena went next. She spoke quickly and with her hands, the way people do when they are telling a story they have told before, but that still matters to them every time. Her mother had been a field surgeon in a conflict zone, a military doctor who worked out of a medical station that was, on more than one occasion, not a station at all, but the back of a moving vehicle. One night they had received a patient with a serious internal injury who could not survive the hour-long drive to the nearest proper facility. The vehicle kept moving because stopping was not safe. Her mother had performed the surgery in the back of that moving truck, in the dark, with the equipment she had in her bag and the help of one assistant, while the truck went over bad roads and the patient held on to the side rail with both hands and did not make a single sound, because he had been told to be quiet. Both of them had survived. Her mother had made sure of that. "Did she see that as remarkable?" Vela asked. Rena shook her head. She said it was just the next problem that needed solving. Vela looked at Hana. "Your people say that a great deal." "Yes," Hana said. "We do." Doyun's story was quieter than the others. He told her about the first machine he had ever built. He was 7 years old. His family's apartment had no air cooling system. Too expensive, too old a building. In the summer, it was very hot. One night he could not sleep because of the heat, and he lay in his bed looking at the broken fan in the corner of his room. It had stopped working months before, and no one had gotten around to fixing it. He looked at it for a while. Then he got up, took it apart, and spread all the pieces on his bedroom floor. He spent the rest of the night figuring out how it worked. By the time the sun came up, he had it running. His father had come in to wake him for school and found him asleep on the floor, fans spinning above him, a smile on his face. His father had picked him up and carried him to his bed without waking him, Hanwin, and let him sleep through school that morning. "I didn't know that part," Dohyun said. "He told me years later." The room was very still. Even the candles on the table seemed to be listening. Viola sat with the weight of these three small stories for a long moment. They were nothing extraordinary. No great battles, no world-changing discoveries. A fisherman on a broken boat, a doctor in a moving truck, a child in a broken fan. And yet, she looked at the table. Then she looked up at Hana. "Your species," she said slowly, "has been dying and rebuilding since before you had fire." She said it not as a criticism and not as flattery. She said it the way you say a thing when you have only just understood it and are still turning it over in your mind to see if it holds. "And you never stopped." Hana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Ace softly. That's the only story we know how to tell, Your Grace. The dinner went on for another hour. They talked about smaller things after that, food and the city, and what rain felt like on different planets. But Viola stayed quiet for long stretches, eating slowly, listening more than she spoke. When the humans finally said their goodnights and left the room, she stayed at the table alone for a while. Soren came in quietly to clear the dishes and did not say anything. Viola looked at the window. The city was dark and glowing outside. Somewhere in it, people were working and resting and fixing things and building things and telling stories to each other in small warm rooms, just like this one. She thought about that for a long time. The report appeared on every council member's desk on a Monday morning, 9 days after the attack. It was 42 pages long, neatly formatted, and carried the official seal of the Internal Security Directorate. The title read, Preliminary Findings. Palace Attack, Authorship Under Review. The language was careful and measured, the kind of language that sounds neutral but moves in one clear direction the entire time. By page 12, the direction was unmistakable. By page 22, it was explicit. The report suggested, not stated, but suggested, carefully and with qualifications, that the palace attack may have been orchestrated by an outside party with an interest in being seen as the palace's saviors. A party that had arrived recently, operated with unusual independence, carried equipment undetectable by palace systems. Timon had been present at exactly the right moments to neutralize each of the three infiltrators before Valorian security could reach them. It named no one directly. It did not need to. There was only one unit in the palace that matched every point on that list. By midday, 3 council members had formally requested a security review. By evening, 2 senior court officials had filed written concerns. By the following morning, the story had spread through the palace staff the way all stories spread. Faster than the truth, quieter than a lie, and impossible to trace back to its source. Hannah heard about the report from a sympathetic palace archivist who passed her a copy in the corridor, folded inside a document envelope, without saying a word. Once she read it in her room with the door locked and felt something cold and heavy settle in her chest. She went to Taiho. He read it once quickly. Then he read it again, slower. His face did not change much, but Hane had been watching him long enough to notice the slight tension in his jaw that meant he was controlling something. How wide is this? He asked. Most of the council has seen it. A lot of the senior staff. It's moving fast. He nodded. Get everyone together. They gathered in Taiho's room, 5 people in a small space. Hana gave them a summary. Rena listened with the focused expression she wore when she was hearing bad news about a patient. Doyun looked at the floor, thinking. Yuna looked at Taiho. They're confining us to quarters, Taiho said, pending a formal security review. Enter palace freely until the review is palace freely until the review is complete. How long? Rena asked. However long they want it to take, Taiho said. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the palace city moved through its afternoon routines, unconcerned. This isn't about the attack, Yuna said. It wasn't a question. No, Taiho said, it isn't. Hana spent the next 48 hours in her room working. She was a diplomatic liaison, which meant she was trained in exactly this kind of situation, not physically, not tactically, but in the slow, careful work of building a case with documents and records and the kind of evidence that does not require anyone to take your word for anything. She pulled every record she could access from within her quarters, communications logs, security reports, maintenance schedules, supply manifests. She built a timeline of the attack on a spare data pad and went through it hour by hour. She found things, small things at first, inconsistencies in the maintenance logs from the day before the attack, an access request for sub-level systems that was filed under a staff member's clearance, but did not match that staff member's recorded movements, a supply manifest that listed components matching the jamming devices found in the palace. Valorian components, custom manufactured, ordered 6 weeks before the attack. She brought everything she had found to Doyun. He looked at the maintenance logs for 3 minutes. Then he looked up. These were modified, he said, and someone changed the entries after the fact. You can see the timestamp shadow if you know what to look for. He pulled her data pad closer and pointed. Here, and this one. Can you prove it? Hana asked. "Give me 2 hours," he said. She gave him 2 hours. He came back with a full technical breakdown. The original log entries, recovered from the system's backup layer, compared against the modified versions. The changes were small but clear. Someone had edited the maintenance records to remove evidence of access to the sub-level generator systems, access that had been used in the days before the attack to study the layout of the palace power grid. Do-hyun had not hacked anything. He had not broken into any restricted system. But he had simply looked very carefully at the information that was already there and read what it was actually saying. Not what it appeared to say, what it said. "Who has edit access to the maintenance logs?" Hana asked. Do-hyun looked at the access record. He read the clearance level. He looked at Hana. Neither of them said the name out loud. They didn't need to. There were fewer than 8 people in the entire palace with that level of access to that specific system, and one of those 8 people had been pushing very hard from the very beginning to remove the human unit from the palace. Taiho went to Vela directly. This was not protocol. He had been confined to quarters. He was not supposed to be in the corridor, let alone requesting an audience with the Princess Queen. He did it anyway, because there was no other option, and because Taiho had never been someone who waited when waiting made things worse. Commander Orth stopped him at the entrance to the royal wing. For a moment, the two of them stood facing each other in the corridor, the Valorian guard captain and the human commander, both completely calm, both completely serious. "I need 10 minutes, Taiho said. "After that, if she wants to send us home, we'll go." Orath looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Vila received him in her study. She was standing when he came in, not sitting. She had clearly been pacing, which meant she already knew something was wrong and was not happy about it. Taiho set the document case on her desk. He did not perform, did not argue, did not make a speech. He simply said, "We did not do this. Here is the proof. If we ask only that you look." Then he stood back and was quiet. Vela looked at the documents. She read quickly. She was a fast reader, one of the things her tutors had noted about her when she was young. She went through Hana's timeline. She went through Do-hyun's technical breakdown. She looked at the recovered log entries, the access records, the supply manifests. She was quiet for a long time after she finished reading. Then she asked very precisely, "How did your engineer recover the original log entries?" "The backup layer of any data system stores a ghost image of all edits for 72 hours, Taiho said. "It's a standard feature for error correction. Your system has it." He just looked. Vela looked at the documents again. "No one on my security staff found this." "They were looking at us," Taiho said. "Not at the logs." She closed the document case. She was very still. Taiho could not tell exactly what she was feeling. She was too controlled for that. But something in her face had shifted, become colder and harder in a way that was not directed at him. "You may return to your quarters," she said. "The confinement order will be lifted within the hour." Taiho nodded, gave a small bow, and left. Vela stood alone at her desk with the document case in front of her for a while. Then she pressed a button on her comm system and said, in a very calm voice, "Send me Lord Austin." The investigation that followed was quiet, quick, and thorough. Austin had spent 31 years being careful, but he had never, in all that time, had to be careful around people who documented everything as a matter of habit, who treated evidence like a natural resource to be gathered and organized, who looked at a modified maintenance log and saw not a clean surface, but a shadow of everything that had been there before. He had not understood, until it was too late, that this was simply how humans worked. Spring came to the palace city the way it always did, slowly and then all at once. The cold gray mornings gave way to mornings with color in them. The trees along the main avenue pushed out small pale leaves. The fountains in the courtyard were switched back on after the winter, and the sound of running water filled the open spaces of the palace grounds from early morning until dark. The sky above the mountains turned a deeper, warmer shade of blue. It had been 6 weeks since the attack. Lord Austin had been removed from the High Council on a Tuesday, shared quietly without ceremony. 2 of his allies had resigned. A third was under formal investigation. The report that had accused the human unit of organizing the attack had been officially retracted and sealed. These things were announced in brief official statements and noted in the daily record and then moved past, the way powerful institutions prefer to move past their own failures, quickly with minimal discussion and with a strong preference that no one looked too closely at the details. But other things had happened that could not be as easily filed away. The human confederacies standing in the Valorian Empire had been formally reviewed at a full council session, the first full council session that Vela had attended in person in over 2 years. She had sat at the head of the table and made the case herself, without notes, or without a prepared speech. She had spoken for 40 minutes about what she had seen, what she had learned, and what she believed. When she was done, the vote had not been close. For the first time in 800 years, a new species had been elevated from the status of client civilization to partner civilization within the Valorian Empire. The announcement had been short. The significance of it had not been. Across the empire, in the archives of every species that had sat below the line for generations, the news arrived and was read in silence, and then read again. The human unit was rotating home. Their assignment had been for 3 months, and the 3 months were done. And there was a transport waiting at the palace landing pad to take them back to the transit hub where a ship home would be waiting. Shortaiho had handled the paperwork and the formal handover with the incoming unit. Doyun had packed his tools and his kit bags and had spent the previous evening in the engineer's bay, writing a detailed technical note for the palace maintenance staff about the backup log recovery process and how to use it. Rena had cleaned the medical station back to exactly the condition it had been in when they arrived, and then cleaned it once more. Hana had sent a long message to the diplomatic corps and a shorter, more personal message to the palace archivist, who had slipped her the report that had started everything. Yuna had packed his bag. He traveled light. He always had. They gathered at the landing pad in the early morning, when the sky was still more gray than blue. Their bags were at their feet. The transport sat behind them with its ramp down and its interior lights on, warm and yellow against the pale morning air. They were not expecting anyone to come, but she came. Viola crossed the landing pad with Soren and Commander Orath 2 steps behind her. She was not wearing her ceremonial robe. She was wearing a simpler version of court dress. Still formal, still unmistakably the clothing of someone important, but without the full display of the throne hall. She walked quickly, and the sound of her footsteps on the stone was the first thing the unit heard before they saw her. They turned. They stood up straight, reflexively, the way soldiers do when someone important enters the space. She walked the line of them the same way she had walked it the first morning, weeks ago, in the throne hall, past Taiho, who gave her a small bow, past Doyun, who looked surprised and a little moved, past Rena, who smiled openly and without apology, past Hana, who pressed her hand to her chest in the human gesture of respect. She stopped at the end of the line, in front of Yuna. He was standing straight, rifle strapped to his back, the same way it had been on that first morning. Nothing had changed about the way he carried it. It still had the small hand-scratched measurements along the barrel, the tape on the stock, the complete absence of any detectable energy or heat or signal. It still looked like nothing. It still was not nothing. She looked at it for a moment, then she looked at him. "I never asked," she said in the human tongue. Her pronunciation had improved a great deal in 6 weeks. She had been practicing with Hana every morning, and which Hana had not been asked to keep secret but also had not discussed with anyone. "What do you call it?" Yuna looked at the rifle for a moment, considering. "Do-hyun calls it the fix," he said. "I just call it mine." Vela nodded slowly, the way she nodded when something settled correctly in her mind. She reached into the folds of her court dress and removed a small object. It was old and simple and very plain. A flat circular seal about the size of a palm, carved from a dark gray stone, with a symbol pressed into its surface. The symbol was one of the oldest in Valorian culture. It had no direct translation in any other language, but the closest meaning was something like "of this house," recognized, welcomed. It was the kind of seal given by Valorian sovereigns, very rarely, to individuals formally recognized as belonging to the imperial house. Not as subjects, not as servants, as people. She pressed it into Yuna's hand. He looked at it. He looked at her. He did not say anything for a moment, and his face was doing the thing it did when he was managing something. Not hiding it, just holding it carefully. The thing you carried, Viola said, was never just the weapon. She did not explain what she meant. She did not need to. He understood, and she knew he understood, and that was enough. She took a step back and looked at all of them, the 5 humans standing on her landing pad in the pale morning light, with their ordinary bags and their simple clothes and their quiet, steady eyes. She had known them for 3 months. She had seen them navigate a dark palace, name the truth inside a lie, and sit at a round table and tell her stories she would not forget for the rest of her long life. She nodded to them. It was the same nod she had given them that first evening in the small meeting room. The nod she gave to people she respected. Only this time there was something more in it, something that did not have a name in either of their languages and did not need one. They boarded the transport. Hana was the last up the ramp, and she turned once to look back. The palace rose up behind Vela, ancient and pale in the morning light, and Vela stood very still at the edge of the landing pad and watched. Admiral Kreth had come to oversee the handover of the incoming guard unit. He was a large, serious man who had spent 30 years in Valorian military service and had seen most things there were to see. He stood a little distance from Vela, watching the transport's ramp rise and its engines begin to warm up. A junior officer stood beside him, datapad in hand, waiting. Kreth watched the transport for a moment. He thought about the blackout, about 3 infiltrators neutralized in the dark by a soldier with no powered armor and a rifle that their sensors couldn't find, about a generator fixed by hand in 22 minutes, about candles. He thought about the things he had read in the formal reports and the things he had heard in the quarters. Not the official story and not the rumor, but the layer of truth underneath both of them. He thought about what it meant that a species 200 years into space travel had walked into a 3,000-year-old palace and simply worked. "Make a note," he said to the junior officer. The officer raised the datapad. "Whatever academy trains those people, we're sending observers." The junior officer looked up. "What do we write as the reason, Admiral?" Kreth watched the transport begin to lift. The engines were quiet and even. The morning light caught the hull as it rose and turned it gold for a moment before it broke through the low clouds and was gone. "Right. We want to know how they think," he said. The junior officer wrote it down. The transport climbed above the clouds and leveled out, and below them the palace city became a map, and then a shape, and then nothing. Just the curve of the planet turning slowly in the dark. Inside, the unit was quiet. Do-hyun had already fallen asleep, which was a talent he had and used freely. Rena was reading. Tai-ho was looking at the ceiling, not quite asleep, not quite awake. Hana was writing in her personal log, which she kept in a small paper notebook, handwritten, because some things felt better on paper. Yuna sat by the window and held the small stone seal in his hand. He turned it over a few times, feeling the weight of it, looking at the symbol on its face. He did not know all of what it meant. He would ask Hana later. But he knew what it felt like. It felt like being seen, not for the weapon, not for the thing he had done in the dark corridor, not for any single moment or action or choice, just seen. The whole of it, the whole of them, the whole long, difficult human story of breaking and fixing and going and not stopping. He put the seal carefully into his jacket pocket, close to his chest, and looked out the window at the stars. They were going home, and somewhere behind them, in a palace 3,000 years old, a queen who had not been surprised by anything in a very long time was sitting in her small round room and thinking about 5 people with ordinary bags and quiet eyes and candles in their pockets. And the stories, all of them, every small true one, continued. End.